So thank you. It's great to be here. I'm in London. I'm actually in the office, as you can see, based on, as you can guess from a rather sophisticated artwork behind me. I work for Bank of America. I'm managing director at Bank of America in London. And I run the emerging markets banking business for the bank. I've been in the bank 20 years. I've been in my career is 30 years. I'm starting to fray around the edges a bit after such a long time. I run a business of bankers dotted around a number of jurisdictions. I have teams in London, in New York, in Istanbul, in Moscow, in Dubai, and in Johannesburg. And I built this business from 2010. The team are sort of all sorts of nationalities, etc. The clients are institutions. So we're a corporate investment banking business focused on capital markets. So the clients are large institutions, banks, governments, multinational companies, etc. In addition to that, I'm also a member of the bank's Global LGBT Leadership Executive Council. That's a group of about 50 senior managing directors who are out at work, officially out at work globally. And we have access to the Chief Executive Officer of Bank of America. And I'm part of the public policy unit, so very much focused on media, policy, external sponsorship, etc., and just sort of ensuring a level of visibility about some of the stuff I work with the bank. I'm also a member of the Institute of Directors, although I found over the last year, working from home, etc., that the frequency of my contact with the Institute has become less and less frequent. I am a Tech London advocate. I work with Rush Shaw, his organization, to promote technology companies coming to the UK. I work with two branches of that. One is on the fintech sector, not entirely surprising, and they also have an LGBT plus network, where we're trying to make London and the UK the best place for LGBT people to set up tech companies. And I'm working with some Israeli connections around something like that. So that's an overview of the company. My career of the last 20 years. I began my career, shall I go back to my ancient history? I began my career actually in January 1990. And looking at the people on this call, that's already probably off the charts in terms of age. It was not actually a career based in the UK at the beginning. I began the first day of work actually after my postgraduate degree was a flight to Hong Kong. I started with a bank called Hong Kong and Shanghai Banking Corporation, which is now HSBC, which is having a lot of trouble, as you can see from the news, and began an internship there in Hong Kong for 3 months. And then I was very lucky to do a further 3 months in Toronto before my first posting, which was in June 1990, to Dubai in the United Arab Emirates. It was an 18-month posting. I was doing 3 months in regional foreign exchange and then commercial banking for a year. And as a gay man, age 24, arrived in Dubai thinking, my God, what have I done? Better focus on my career for the next 15 months because nothing else is going to be happening.
Darren, can we just take you back a little bit to your childhood before that?
Yeah.
So we get your background, and then you can tell us about Dubai, because I think we would all have a sense of the kind of young man you were going to Dubai at that point.
Okay, I'm getting ahead of myself. Okay, so a lesson in ancient history. Childhood, I think I can remember that far back. I'll mention the date because it's interesting. I think for some of the topics that might come up today. I was born actually in Gloucestershire, just outside a small town called Stroud, in September 1965. So, we are talking after the war, and very, very long time ago. But interestingly, the day I was born, homosexuality was illegal in this country. I wasn't aware of it at the time, obviously, and the law was only partially changed in November 1967. I only say the relevance about that is just to stress two things. One is how quick progress has been for LGBT people like myself and yourselves over the last few decades. But also, just to highlight when we come to my sort of younger life, when I'm thinking about the teens, those awkward, difficult years of any young person's life in terms of identity and discovery and nervousness and change. That was happening barely 12, 13 years after male homosexuality was decriminalized. It wasn't made legal, it was decriminalized. And so that was still being reflected very much in the terminology, the words, the attitudes that were around. Forget the lack of role model, Claire. I mean, if anything, it was actually fending off much more aggressive culture in terms of negative culture, because attitudes took a while to change, but change they have. So my childhood was sort of countryside, to paraphrase a TV program. I felt like the only gay boy in the village at times, and that's what it felt like, because there was, both in culture and politically and in the public domain, there were no role models at all. So one did feel particularly exacerbated, I think, growing up in the countryside, as you were the only one, right? You were going through this rather scary transformation, which was really very, very disconcerting indeed. The highlights of the time were, apart from the farmers' discos, you can imagine how much fun they were. I was proud to represent my hometown of Cheltenham in both rugby and hockey at the same time. So those were my passions as a young man, sort of rugby and hockey. And when I went to university, after A-level, went to university in Edinburgh, gave up the rugby, thinking I was getting injured too much, and focused on my hockey, which I continued to play for a while. Although at the time at university, that hockey career came to a premature end through actually an incidence of homophobic abuse directed towards me. But I carried it up again, my hockey, after, in my 30s, right through to till I was 40. In my family, I was the first to go to university. My father was very, very proud, needless to say. You wanted to hear a bit about young life and what shaped me, I think, Claire, in terms of getting to that juncture, or object with any other questions at this stage?
No, yeah, carry on about that, about your father and...
Well, when we spoke a couple of weeks ago, you said it'd be nice to know sort of what shaped you, what sort of how things, from your young life, and inevitably, ineluctably, that sort of happens with all people, right, in terms of early experiences. I think if you're thinking about my sort of sexual identity, I mean, on the one side, I mean, just given the time I was growing up, this comes out, you'll see later in my career, a natural, very, very strong instinct to hide my identity and to myself and to defend myself and conceal my identity. And that had various repercussions in later life in terms of, sort of shielding, not letting people come or get to know me very well, particularly, which is a very unproductive thing to do. My father was a very hardworking guy, self-made man, one of 7 children. My oldest uncle, I later found out, was actually gay, and left the family home of Bristol in the 30s to live a life away from the family because he was gay. He went to New Zealand and was never heard of again, very sadly. But my father has told me that story. But, if I look at the sacrifices my father made, he spent a lot less time with his family than he would have ideally liked. He was trying to build a home. He was trying to, actually literally build a home. He worked in construction and he was building a home, and also to build a career and look after us. So, and I think, I could see a great deal of resilience in there, or rather also a rather annoying English reserve, which I also inherited, I hasten to add. And so when it came to, my 20s, when, I still couldn't come out to him. I was still very much holding back, and we couldn't really speak as openly and and affectionately as maybe we should have at the time. But also I had a lot of ambition in me too. I also wanted to succeed, and I could see that drove my father. I had a wanderlust, an absolute desire, crazy desire to travel. I thought it very exotic. Now, we're talking about when I was growing up, sort of 70s and then 80s. Overseas travel, it wasn't a case of EasyJet, right? in my postgraduate degree course, Stelios Hagianou was a graduate with me in my class, right? And you won't believe it, his project for the year end was actually setting up a low price airline. So, anyway, I'm the guy with the mortgage, he's the one with billions, right? So he got it right. But anyway, so travel was not so readily available then, so it was terribly exotic. And I just wanted to travel and see the world. I had this sort of yearning to do so. And what else shaped me from that period actually is, I was a child of Margaret Thatcher. And the changes in the country that are happening then, not universally popular, controversial in many respects, but also were offering opportunities to people. In the mid-'80s, you also had the Big Bang in the financial city, which put an end to this sort of old school network and actually gave opportunities to people called Darren who went to state comprehensive schools like me. I didn't have to be Toby from Eton to get on in the city. So, things started to change and things seemed to be possible. And that combined with my desire, I set off straight away. And, I really began seriously when I was 20. I had an opportunity. I was studying languages in Edinburgh, and I had an opportunity to go and study for a whole year in the Soviet Union, a country that doesn't exist anymore, in Russia, because I was studying Russian, obviously. So I was in a provincial city in now Russia called Voronezh, and learning Russian effectively as a Soviet citizen. And we're talking about sort of 86, 87, and trust me, it was an awful lot of fun. There were more imaginative and exciting places for me to have chosen to spend my 21st birthday. But anyway, it happened. And that sort of, I suppose, brings me back to that sort of phase of my career of traveling, Claire. I specifically wanted one to travel. But
you started with the easygoing places, Russia, Dubai.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, well,
open-minded.
We stopped. We diverted when we got to Dubai in my career. My career was only sort of 6 months into it, right? And I thought, God, what have I done? Dusty, hot, illegal to be gay, as indeed it is to this day. It remains to be done. So, and strictly speaking, according to the statutes, punishable by the death penalty. So when you see these pictures of Dubai beaches, just bear that in mind. Although I think in practice they turn a blind eye. But anyway, I was all very consciously aware of this at 24, and I thought, well, this is going to be 15 months of complete boredom. Of course, after 3 months of arriving in Dubai, Iraq invaded Kuwait, and the region was pulled into, at the time, quite a scary, unprecedented amount of violence and uncertainty, which culminated in January 91 in the bombing campaign in the first Gulf War. So that was almost a side story, because the important thing that really happened was actually 2 weeks after I got there. And the great and the good of Dubai society and the managers at my bank, and my bank it's a subsidiary, what is now HSBC. It's called the British Bank of the Middle East. Formerly known as the Imperial Bank of Persia. So you sort of get the message, right? It's a bit stuffy and a bit conservative and a bit sort of old Raj, tut cigars and port, and that's very much what it was like. And 2 weeks after I got there, they arranged a formal reception to introduce the newly arrived eligible bachelor to the great and good of society, brackets, including their daughters, close brackets. And little did they know how their plans went awry, because it was that night, actually, I met an Indian man who's now my husband, 31 years later. They couldn't have realized just how crazy things were. And of course, we had to sort of tread very carefully, because you sort of smile and get on, and you met at a few social occasions and get on, etc. But when you're trained to be rather hesitant within a context like that, where you have to be protective because of your own security, if anything else, there's sort of a tentative signaling between two people. Anyway, that worked out very, very nicely. And after 15 months, there was an interruption in our relationship, replaced by very expensive phone calls and holidays and travel, where I actually went to Tokyo for 2 years. I went to Japan and continued my adventure in Japan, which is a great experience. I was traveling around the region a lot. As a young man, it was great fun, and the Japanese are great fun, and it's a very, very interesting country. But after a couple of years of that, two things happened. I was growing tired of living away from Lashman because I realized halfway through my posting to Tokyo that I'd sort of fallen madly in love with him. And secondly, and therefore I wanted to go back to Dubai so we could be together. And there was actually another homophobic incident in Japan. It was an expatriate, a British national, at a reception for bankers, senior bankers. And, this is 1993, and I was 26, 27 or so like that. So quite junior. And, Japan is a very ageist and sexist society, to be frank. We're talking about the 1990s, so bear with me. So it's not like Japan it is today. And this guy had actually got wind of the fact that I was gay from having done an audit in the Dubai office, which is my previous office. And he just couldn't resist it, right? He was just a very, very unpleasant person. And he literally shouted across the reception, "Oi, Darren, I hear you're gay and you've got AIDS." I mean, he really went for it. And I was sort of rendered speechless, as you can imagine. Now, he thought that was all terribly funny, and lots of very awkward silence, and I sort of left the room. But unfortunately, it being Japan at that time, there was no way that a junior banker could, withstand, a public humiliation of that magnitude. And it was pretty clear the bank wanted to get rid of me after that. And there were no legal protections at the time. So there was no infrastructural support at the bank either. And so fast forward a few months, I was out of Japan, I was back in Dubai, and it took me a while to get my career back on track. I had to leave banking for a while before going back into another bank, and staying actually with Lashman in Dubai for 10 years, and traveling around some interesting countries around the region, including Iran in the 1990s, working for ANZ, the Australian bank, and Saudi Arabia. And these countries are, not particularly gay friendly. So again, you're getting this message that we had our own existence within, and happily so, but we had to be careful. We had to be very, very careful. And this, building on the history of growing up when I did, it just continues this tradition of keeping those two parts of your life apart. Anything public in terms of the work environment, anything personal. And you can't imagine just how my life has changed and turned upside down since that, right?
So Darren, tell us about that then. You're living this life where you've got a brilliant job, or a good job at least, but you're in the closet at work constantly. So you're effectively lying every day to the people that you respect a lot, that you love. And then you came out. Tell us that story.
I didn't come out in Dubai. I didn't. In fact, we were pretty keen. I mean, 10 years in Dubai is, it's like 20 years anywhere else, right? We'd sort of run out of steam. We wanted to get on. It was just trying to find an opportunity. We found ourselves staying on there because we couldn't stay anywhere else. I mean, Lashman is Indian national. It's a man born and bred in India. It's British national now. And it was illegal to be gay in India. So we couldn't move there, right? And even though his family had been very, very supportive of me and us, there's no way we could go there. There's no job for me to do there. The time for most of those years, I couldn't bring him as a same-sex partner to the UK, even though I'm a British national. That law only changed in the early 2000s. And then there was a mad scramble because, and through an act of great serendipity, I mean, that actually coincided with the time when the bank was actually pressuring me to move to London. We just sort of went, so I said, I played hard to get. I said, oh, well, I'll think about it. And then, of course, went home to Lashman and we sort of popped a cork of champagne and say, right, we're off. Anyway, in 2004, we moved to London. But I was still in the closet, partly because I was still running the Middle East as well as other countries. and still had to go back there. Partly because that was my default pre-programmed position. That's safer, right? It's just, it's natural. The defense mechanism is being prolonged. Why would I risk it? And as I said, I was going back to these countries where things could get very difficult for me, and I didn't want to do that. I suppose in a way a little bit of cowardice as well, to be quite frank. Lakshman and I then went through a period of getting our lives organized. So, civil partnerships. The law was promulgated in 2005. We jumped in with the first opportunity on the 12th of January, 2006, and did a quickie at the Cadogan Hotel in London in terms of making us legal, right? We'd already been together 16 years by then. And he was still an Indian national, and in theory, on an annual visa. It had to be renewed each year. So there was still quite a lot of uncertainty. And it was quite charming. On his visa, it said, partner to Darren Rickards. So we'd sort of joke he was my sort of chattel and vassal. But it was a private joke. But anyway, things were stabilized, and he got his British nationality in 2008. And we just carried on that way, Claire. I mean, my family were very supportive, his family were very supportive, but I was still not making that leap. And I didn't realize until I did make that leap, which was actually about 6 years ago, I didn't realize that it was really that much of a problem. It's only in the cold, hard light of day, that honesty of having done it, recognizing several things. One, the magnitude of that weight around your shoulders that you can't even feel when it's there, right? It's only when it goes, then you suddenly find yourself standing about 2 inches taller. Then you think, God, why do I feel so good that this is out there, right? But also in terms of how I've changed in the workplace is, firstly, never underestimate the power of being an authentic leader, of being seen to be honest. And given that I was living this double life you refer to, Claire, I was concealing so much. I was pushing away from people. I was excluding myself from networks that would actually have been very helpful to be part of, because I didn't want to get drawn into conversations I'd be uncomfortable with. I didn't want that Monday morning conversation, how was your weekend? And you think, oh God, what did I say last week? And I have to make something up. And Darren, why do you keep going to India every time you go on holiday? I can't say, well, my husband's Indian. It's just, I was avoiding those conversations, and that's exhausting and it's unproductive. And it suddenly became Jekyll and Hyde, because the perception of me internally, I was standoffish. I was short to temper. People didn't really like working with me that much. And I can mention that in all honesty, because things have changed so much. And when did that change? It changed 6 years ago. And because my boss had known for about 8, 9 years, a very shrewd German gentleman, he worked it out. And we were having a senior managing director's summer reception, right? Spouses, partners, welcome. And Lakshman and I had just celebrated 25 years together. And that's a pretty remarkable achievement, right? That's actually, my father will forgive me saying, it's longer than my parents were married before they divorced. That ain't bad going. We were proud of that. We had 2 very supportive families. We had more friends than we knew what to do with. We were respected and we were happy, and we were respected and we were proud of our lives as well. We were good people, right? And then that sort of nice person I would leave at the front door when I come into work, and I'd change again. And this just couldn't go on. I mean, this is just absolutely shocking. My hesitation was that by coming out, I'm telling all these people I actually like and respect at work that I've been lying to them for years. And I'm going to have to deal with the damage. I mean, how's that going to work, right? Anyway, cut a long story short, there was this reception. And so I went to my boss and I said, Fernando, I think I'm going to bring Lakshman. He said, yeah, you should. It's your husband. You should come. And so I was promised in a way. I sort of had to do it. And it was the day of the tube strike. So Lakshman and I got there at different times. And it was a bit nerve-wracking because I'd got there a little early and I'd met everyone's sort of husbands and wives and, how do you do? It was all very formal. And the reception started at one of the museums in central London. There must have been about 120 people, so 60 colleagues plus. And I said, sod it, let's go. First stop, I took him into the reception hall. The first stop was the bar, and 2 glasses of Sauvignon Blanc never passed down so quickly in your life, a little Dutch courage. And then I did the rounds. I was literally going to people and saying, let me reciprocate, here's my husband. And, there's a few double takes. A few people mysteriously found themselves walking past me 3 or 4 times, waiting for an introduction. It was literally like that. Sort of, gosh, and a lot of genuine interest. The inevitable second question, whenever you introduce, as a gay man, whoever introduced my husband to a heterosexual couple, the second question is always the same. The second question is always, how long have you been together? I don't know if you've ever experienced that, but it's always, how long have you been together? So that one happened. But yeah, so I sort of came out with a bang, if you excuse the expression, and things completely changed. Visibility, being seen to be authentic, and that's one of the reasons I do so much with the networks here in the bank. Create, it's a motivation for so much. And what was coming out for me at the time was a expressly selfish act. I was doing it for me and for Lashman, and to hell with the world. The ramifications of that decision were much more generous to those around me, in that it was actually helping so many more people. I can come on to that in terms of.
Yeah, talk to us about the networks, Darren. Why do you think it's important that there are senior leaders like you who are out, first of all, and then why is it important that we have these gay networks at, LGBT plus networks at big organisations?
I think it is important. We have, it's interesting. People can be blasé and dismissive of that and say, well, like Bank of America, we have networks for networks, right? We have 9 networks. We have very, very focused networks, and they can be very powerful in terms of directing attention and resource, whether financial or just sort of technical, managerial resource at an issue, right? You do not want them to go across the Rubicon and become silos. You don't want to create divisions where there aren't any. But for example, in terms of our sort of women in banking work and things like that, there are initiatives that work there, but we work across the networks of Bank of America on this intersectional basis, so that we'll have sort of the multicultural unit or the disability awareness group, for example. They do joint events just to bring awareness. So you don't want to create silos, but they're very good at condensing resources on a set of objectives. People can see that. The second thing is they are a structure around which you can have networking events. People can meet, they can promote, they can represent at outside panels or speak to the media. Something I do, right, for the bank. But the most important thing I think for the network is it's a structure around which 2 other benefits can coalesce. And that is the out at work phenomenon, to your point about being visible. Now, depending on what size your company is, you can have an individual who's very happy to be out at work, respected, doing well, looked up at, prosperous, and you have someone on the other side of the building that don't know they exist. And that person could be someone who's struggling in the closet or not sure if it would be a receptive, a positive work environment. The out of work concept around a network is a public forum. So, us are sort of online, but it can just be done with a monthly email, updating people on events or events to come or training sessions, and you can, through that, you can see who are out at work. That phenomenon then created the Ally program. We have an Ally program in the bank. We have about 32,000 people globally signed up as visible allies. And that's the key. If you have a structure like that, then they can become visible allies. And they can be helped to be visible. And that was one of the support structures that actually did have quite a bearing on me. is that I could see how many people in my immediate work environment were allies, either because they were registered with the network as such, or actually we have little badges that go on offices and desks and say LGBT ally. And it's just a sign that, people are willing to be visible in their support. And when you see more and more of that happening, that's very, very powerful and encouraging. And by being out of work, I've been approached to be a mentor for two types of junior. One, LGBT juniors, as you would, not entirely surprising, but also what you would be surprised at is the amount of heterosexual male juniors who want me as a mentor, specifically because I have a different perspective to them in the workplace and on life and in terms of my experience. And moving slightly away from the networking issue is the value to my firm, and the value I bring to the firm is also not only authentic leadership, and I'm respected as such, but also a very different perspective, and I'm valued for that. And I think coming into a more diverse environment like London over the last, say, 10 years, compared to some of my earlier career, whether it's working in the Middle East or working in Japan, or the early days living in London, where meetings generally were, white blokes, right, basically, or the conversation. You needn't have had those conversations in those meetings because you knew how the meeting would go and you knew what the answer would be, right? It's but when you start introducing, for example, a female voice, an ethnic minority voice, my husband Lashman, he sounds posher than Prince Charles, but he's actually very, very Indian, right? And he has very, very different perspectives on things. And that's fascinating. And you can bring that into the mix. And I've always found my direct experience has been the conversations, debate, consultations follow a different course because people redirect with different perspectives. And the outcomes are immensely more satisfying and based more on consensus and broader support. And so it's the theory, the metric of diversity.
That's good. That brings me quite neatly onto my last question before we go to the questions that are being asked. But most companies, all companies, should have diversity policies. There tends to be a bit of a gap between these policies and the reality. How do we overcome this? How do we take the positive action that needs to be taken to bash some of these barriers down, given that the causes and the roots of these problems are often long-standing discrimination?
That's an excellent point, because companies, medium-sized or all-sized companies have policies. Some are sort of cut and paste policies. Some are regulatory-driven policies, and some are bespoke, suitable for certain employers. And yes, I've seen it. Sometimes if the networks, for example, the LGBT networks, don't start embracing those policies, then sometimes the steam can run out, and not every employer can have big D&I teams, right? We have huge budgets and resources for that, but you have to be realistic. Not all companies do. But some of the work I've been doing over the last 6 years is some about policy, because we work on policy and we take guidance. We work under the Stonewall Index regime for annual accreditation in terms of our policies, and we work on policies. And there's even Bank of America who I think are extraordinarily good at this. There's much more work we're doing in trans, for example, trans rights and ensuring adequate protections there. It's getting a package of policies and actually translating that into the culture and the external voice and the face of an employer to the outside world. I mean, much of my drive is really focused on talent. And like in any industry, it's not just banking industry, we're in an arms race. Every day we're fighting this arms race for talent. And we have to identify it, motivate it, onboard it, and retain it, right? And that's how we boost our shareholders. And McKinsey and others have put all these studies about how diverse workforces generate the greatest value long term. And how do you do that? And you have to recognize that talent can appear in any form, right? Any hue or structure or frame or wherever it is. And we can't afford barriers to be erected, perceived or otherwise, internal or external. to the recruitment of talent. And statistically, some of that talent will be LGBT. And that very fact should be embraced, because that diversity of opinion is important. Now, how do you make that set of values and policies and cultures work? There's a certain amount of externalizing that. I mean, you have to sort of be seen to be living those values and standing up for those values. And opportunities may exist from time to time where you can make public statements as a firm, publicly about certain developments. Some companies don't like to get too political about certain things, but you can actually use social media platforms like we do, whether it's LinkedIn or Twitter, celebrating LGBT History Month or Black History Month, for example, just in terms of we celebrate with our colleagues. One of the things we've been doing is working with some of our clients, some of them as big as Vodafone, where we help them set up an ally program, is just being more vocal about external communication of their values. Now, these can be corporate values as well as internal values. So, on websites, for example, or LinkedIn posts, you can have your corporate values, and it doesn't have to be, cheesy corporate stuff, like a consultancy type thing. It's sort of, but we want to be the best company in this area. We respect our suppliers or our market presence. We respect diversity in the workforce, etc., etc. And we found that some companies actually miss these basic steps. I'm not suggesting your companies do, but celebrate successes. If one of the workforce, someone who's LGBT gets married, for example, hypothetically, you can actually create a poster out of that. We celebrate with so and so and her spouse, etc. It's that sort of external messaging, and allies are very, 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 very useful for that. And role models are useful for that. And we're a big employer. We have plenty of people we can choose from for that. But we have worked with clients, and actually, sort of borrow a role model, or lend a role model. So we can go and support each other's panels. But I'm getting a bit off the question here. But you're right. I mean, I think it's people in the workforce are busy. They've got corporate objectives that need to be met. I think it's important as much as possible to support through networks that sort of visible expression of what the policy's objectives are, and make sure that people know them. So there's externalizing through LinkedIn and these sort of things, and Twitter, but also we find at the entry point when you're looking at recruitment, when you're trying to target a younger audience, maybe for recruitment, is to make sure people know the values and what your policies are. And updates to policy, should be shared. I mean, very often, depending unless it's regulatory driven, some policy can be built on consensus depending on the size of the company, right? I mean, you can actually sound out through employee engagement studies. These are prospective policies we have. These are the changes we're looking at, or what are your objectives? I mean, have you guys asked your employees that? And we do that actually every year. Is what would you like more from, your benefits system, the sort of leave structures, the work environment, the reporting issues, etc. And it's all sort of done on a confidential basis. You can use that sort of bottom-up feedback to help construct policies that reflect that culture and the interests of your employee base. If that's an adequate.
That's good. That's good. That's good. Matt, I'm going to come to you. Can you?
Hello.
Can you give us some questions that are being asked in the chat, please?
Yeah, sure. So yeah, something a couple of people want to know here, Darren, if you're comfortable to talk about it, which is really how living the double life, I think, as you described it, had an impact on your mental well-being.
Well, I hated coming into work on Mondays. It's a very, very good question, and I mean, we've all read or seen Jekyll and Hyde, right? I mean, I'm exaggerating that parallel again. It's an unsustainable thing, and it's you feel slightly, one felt slightly ashamed at the dishonesty, because people were being very trusting in me as the leader, and I was being profoundly dishonest, and I really, really struggled with that. I could have maybe been a little more subtle in coming out, but as it happened, it worked out well. Let me put it this way. I mean, for years, even past the point when I need not have lived that double life, clearly. I mean, we're talking about two different people. I mean, if those two individuals met, they wouldn't, you wouldn't recognize them. Right? You wouldn't recognize each other. They were literally chalk and cheese, these two people. And that was unsustainable because those two would always clash. It's like positive and negative, sparks start to fly in the middle. But I've lost my train of thought a bit there. But yes, it was for a number of years, I still had this residual legacy fear of an injustice. It could have been my experience of Japan, where I lost my job. It could have been earlier experiences as well. I was terrified. And I was terrified of losing everything. Losing my job, my employment, my salary, my position. And I feared this great injustice in the workplace. As it happened, when it happened, to my shock, the great injustice was not perpetrated against me, but by me. I was prejudging people's reactions. And that was profoundly unfair. As it happened, I didn't have the right to do that. And part of the reasoning Lashman had was, said, come on, let's go, let's come out, right? Was that, we live in London, right? We've never, apart from some curiosity, we've never had an episode, touch wood, it's not to suggest it doesn't happen, of homophobic abuse. He's never had one of racist abuse. So, and I know firsthand that we recruit from that same society. Society has moved on. So it was very unjust. And it was a pathological fear of injustice, and yet still knowing I was being unfair to these people. So you can guess from that answer the impact on my mental health. I was stressed. I put on a lot of weight. I was unhappy. Sleep was routinely a problem. Mind you, I was traveling all the time as well, so there's quite a lot of jet lag in there. But you were just not settled. And to this point I made earlier, Claire, I don't mean to repeat myself, is that the lifting of that weight, that yoke, just by being honest, had a profound impact on my life. Because, and as I said, I mean, I literally felt figuratively and literally to be walking 2 inches taller because, that burden had gone.
Thanks, Darren. Yeah, I mean, I think it's little wonder that you held out a little longer with that stuff, given some of the experiences that you described earlier in your talk. It wasn't just a irrational fear of injustice so much as a lived experience of injustice in the workplace, by the sounds of it. And one of our attendees wonders, how you overcame those experiences and whether you feel that they left a lasting impression on you. I guess part of that lasting impression was you kind of holding out from coming out despite a desire to. Was there any other impacts on your sort of subsequent behaviours in the workplace and the rest of your career or anything like that?
Well, I think things have changed. I mean, Claire, in our prep call a couple of weeks ago, think how things have changed over the last 20 years. I mean, I'm actually working more on a 30, 40-year time horizon. Things are unrecognizably better, Matt. There are still things that we need to do, right? And I think society as a whole is not so well advanced in terms of its understanding and knowledge of trans issues, for example. I mean, the LGBT, I think, is that much further ahead. Trans is still, we have work to do. But did it have a lasting impact? Yeah, I think, of course, it did. I do recognize the support, the responsibility now I find to young LGBT people in my acquaintance and in work, in terms of the time commitment I should find to help them, in terms of supporting them and nurturing them. And I'm not on a quest to make sure everyone comes out. That would be, well, profoundly hypocritical for a start. But it's, everyone has to make their own decision. But I can attest to what a positive thing it was for me. and what more positive energy has come from it for a broader audience since being a role model, if I may call it that, and just being honest and speaking. And there are benefits around that. So people have in turn come out and found it to be a positive experience as well. But did it have a lasting impact? It would, of course. It is part of my history, right?
Absolutely. I mean, on sort of on that note of kind of moving forward, one of our attendees, Paul, asks how Bank of America reconciles the LGBTQ rights and equality policies in some of the countries in which it operates that might criminalize LGBTQ people. And I guess from your position and also your experience of kind of travel and living in some of those places, that must be something you've got some interesting views on.
That's an excellent question, Paul. And just to be clear, there's still I'm not halfway still in the closet, but in certain work environments, I'm much more careful still. Now, if you saw the Bank of America post 10 days ago, there's a global LinkedIn post about me, right? Being on the global 100 LGBT executives. So, I'm kidding myself if I think that, people don't know, but, I'm very, very careful still. Matt, I still have to go to Saudi Arabia. I still travel, less so now, to Russia. Even other parts of the Middle East as well. So I'm still cautious and careful. Now, the bank's priority is my personal safety and well-being. And we do business as a firm in countries which have particularly nasty discriminatory laws. I'm also Bank of America, and in recent history, until sort of last year, in fact, in many respects, when it comes to LGBT rights, progress was negative and things were going backwards there, right? So it's something we must always be on guard for. And the bank is very outspoken. It takes very brave, I think, positions, particularly since they're based in Charlotte, North Carolina. It takes some very principled, brave decisions. It would not pull out of a country for this, but it would create an opportunity in a work environment that is supportive. So in India, until recently, depending on the way the Supreme Court was running with that particular case, it was illegal, it was not illegal, it was illegal, it was not illegal. And whilst it was still illegal in India, we were able to set up an ally network portal, but not an out at work LGBT, because we thought it might compromise people. However, our LGBT employees in India enjoyed all the benefits of every other global employee. And that includes, for example, same-sex medical benefits, insurance benefits, etc. So, they are protected within our walls, shall we put it that way. But we can't change the world just yet, just one little bit at a time. But yes, it is interesting. Some of the countries around the world, we have to be very, very vigilant.
Yeah, it's interesting. Actually, that the only time really that I give much thought to kind of being out of work these days is around traveling for work. Recently, I was invited to speak at a conference in Russia where I had to give all of my social media profile handles on my visa form, and that was quite a nerve-wracking moment where I thought a lot about that. So I can really see the intersection there. If you want to be, if you want your work to be global, that presents a lot of barriers still.
Matt, I'm going to ask you to just ask one more question, if that's okay. But just as you're deciding which one, Matt, the next speaker I'm hoping to bring to us is actually a Polish guy, and it's to speak about some of this stuff that we might not already know that much about. So it's not firmed up yet, but one of the reasons it's not firmed up is because we want to ask you about the timings of this event. Is 3:30 a good time, or would another time be better? So I've done a little doodle poll, and I'm going to plonk it into the chat now. If you wouldn't mind just clicking through it at some point, and just ticking the appropriate box. You don't have to put your whole name in. You could just put an initial or something if you want. It's just to give us a sense of what would be a good time for this. So Matt, last question, and then we'll go into the breakout groups, if that's okay.
I think we're through all the questions actually, Claire. So yeah, if you want to share the doodle poll in the chat.
We're getting absolutely lovely feedback, Darren, of people just thanking you for sharing your amazing story. So so I'd like to thank you as well, because I think you've been so open and you know, to the point of vulnerability and certainly authenticity. So thank you so much. We'll do a virtual clap for you.
Thank you very much. That's very kind. Oh, can I join your network, by the way?
Please do. We'd be delighted to have you.
Okay. Well, look, thank you very much indeed for having me and an opportunity. You need to rein me in. If anything, that's the difficulty with working from home, right? In the room, you can kick me under the table if I talk too much.
No, this has been brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. Thank you so much. Right.